Talking about socioeconomic status is an experience that invariably makes me feel uncomfortable. Some of this can be explained by the fact that this is an area in which I have extreme privilege. After all, acknowledging and talking about privilege is never an easy thing to do. But I also have privilege in relation to every other identity we have discussed this semester in SEED except for one, which is sexuality. And yet, socioeconomic status is unique in that I felt a sense of extreme apprehension prior to the weeks where we would be discussing it. So, why is this the topic I struggle with so much? What makes talking about class privilege so much more difficult than talking about white or male or able-bodied or Christian privilege? I think the answer lies partly in the fact that socioeconomic status is more of a spectrum than any other identity. This allows me to say things like, my family may be wealthy, but at least we're not that wealthy. There's always someone with more privilege to make me feel better about my own privilege. I've used these wealthier people throughout my life to minimize my own privilege and avoid having to confront it. In contrast, most other identities are much more cut and dry. With race, for example, people either perceive me as white or perceive me as being a person of color. The implications of this dichotomy are that I cannot deny my whiteness by pointing at someone who is whiter than me, like I can deny my family's wealth by pointing to someone who is wealthier. Getting back to the identity at hand, I obviously have a lot more work to do when it comes to socioeconomic status. I've spent most of my life up to this point trying to deny or at least lessen my class privilege. But acknowledging privilege is often the first step towards coming to terms with that privilege, overcoming guilt, and eventually fighting to make things more equal. So I'd like to take the time now to lay out, without minimizing it, exactly how privileged I am from a socioeconomic standpoint. I grew up in Brookfield, Wisconsin, a suburb about 25 minutes west of Milwaukee. According to data from the 2010 United States Census, approximately 90% of Brookfield residents are white, and the median household income is nearly $90,000 per year. So clearly, the city of Brookfield is a very privileged place, and one of the biggest privileges that comes from living in Brookfield is the schools. The Elmbrook School District, which encompasses Brookfield and the neighboring city of Elm Grove, is one of the best in the state. Furthermore, Brookfield Central High School, which I attended, is consistently ranked as one of the top 5 public schools in Wisconsin. To see how much I benefited from attending this top-notch school, you need only look at the 67 transfer credits I had as an incoming freshman from various AP and college courses I took in high school. These transfer credits make it possible for me to get 2 majors and a certificate in 4 years without ever needing to take more than 15 credits in a semester. While Brookfield as a whole is definitely a place of privilege, it's important to note, since I'm trying to be completely honest about the extent of my class privilege, that my family is wealthy even by Brookfield standards. I'm not sure of the exact number, but I'm fairly certain my dad makes upwards of $250,000 per year. So many privileges come from this sort of extravagant wealth that I don't have time to list them all, but I will highlight some more important ones. Not only can my family afford everything we need to live, but we can also buy most luxury items without having to worry too much about how to pay for them. We can also afford to go on vacations rather frequently. Throughout my life, I've been to Jamaica, the Dominican Republic, Mexico 3 times, Canada, Italy, France, and numerous places in the United States, including Alaska. I've never needed to work in high school because my parents gave me an allowance for spending money. When I did get a job, it was to save up so I could have some spending money in college when I stopped getting an allowance. And speaking of college, my parents would have paid up to the cost of attending UW-Madison regardless of where I chose to go to school. Now, I could try to minimize this privilege by saying that I received a full-ride scholarship here, so my parents aren't really paying for me to go to school. But would I have gotten that scholarship if I hadn't grown up with the privileges outlined before? Probably not. That brings me to an important point. Class privilege is incredibly powerful because its benefits are so far-reaching and permeate every area of one's life. For me, growing up in a wealthy family meant not having to work in high school, which gave me more free time to focus on school and eventually become successful. This success is what eventually led to my scholarship, which gives me a leg up once again, and that money is not a huge concern, and I don't strictly need to work. So much of my success in life can be accredited to my class privilege, which might be why I struggle so much to talk about it. It is conceivable that, if I had been a person of color growing up in the same economic situation that I grew up in, I would have been just as successful. However, it is extremely unlikely that I would have thrived like I have if I had grown up in a poor family who lived in inner city Milwaukee. While it might be a little late in my life to be taking the rudimentary step of fully acknowledging my class privilege, it is a step, nevertheless. And taking this particular step is absolutely fundamental because there's no way I can have honest conversations about socioeconomic status if I'm denying how much privilege I have. In moving past my phase of denial, I've begun a long journey towards coming to terms with my privilege and starting to fight to change the system that systematically favors the rich and disadvantages the poor when it should instead have mechanisms to get us closer to equality.